people in here. All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to Unclouded. This is where we navigate the data, AI, Web3, and the journey away from the confines of the centralized cloud. I'm going to be hosting today. My name is Carson. We do this just about every week, where we explore kind of new ways to shape how we store, think about, and harness data and information in our rapidly changing digital world. You can connect with us, the Unclouded community, via our Telegram channel and follow and engage with us on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. If you're into tech or you're an entrepreneur, you're kind of curious about this like data or AI-driven future we're clearly headed straight towards, I think you've come to the right place. Today, I'm very excited to talk about a topic that I know not a whole ton about. I've been in the Web3 space coming on about a decade. And so you can figure out how old that makes me. But this is a topic that I know the least about. So when Brian from my team suggested we do it, we're like, okay, well, we got to get like actual experts on this topic so that I can just pepper them with questions and we can figure out what this space is all about. So I'm very happy to have a couple of pretty important thinkers in the space on with me today. And so, the decentralized revolution, it's a lot about like reshaping collaboration, governance, even funding, and how we think about ownership. All these different concepts come to the forefront when we start to talk about Web3 stuff. And DAOs, or decentralized anonymous organizations, have been this like topic that has come in waves in terms of its popularity. And with the big move into, autonomous, you're right. This big move into AI and sort of agentic frameworks and things like that, the topic is becoming quite important again, top of mind for a lot of thinkers. So now is a perfect time to discuss this. So I've got a couple of awesome guests with me. I'm going to introduce them, and then I'm going to hand it over to them. So to start with, we've got Greg, who is the CEO of Friends with Benefits. And he's been a cultural innovator and a community builder for quite a long time. We invited Greg here because I really want to kind of explore how FWB's unique network model kind of integrates culture and technology and governance to really like dial into sustaining an ecosystem or a community. And, so they've done this like membership relaunch and some token migration stuff and sort of technical details that make their approach quite interesting. So we want to talk, we're going to get Greg to kind of give us the details on that and the evolving role of cultural DAOs in particular in shaping how Web3 works. And then we've also got Connor from the Network Goods Institute. And so Connor is going to be our system designer who thinks about things like public goods funding and exploring different payment systems, thinking about collective reasoning and tools like a negotiation game to sort of reimagine how we solve problems collectively, and even concepts like decentralized equity and systems that sort of distribute power in fairly fair and opportunistic ways. And then we've got Ryan from DLP Labs, and I'm going to ask Ryan to kind of talk about things like personal assets, example would be like car data, and turning those into revenue streams, and sort of drawing on his past experience at Polygon and Coinbase, and just like discussing how decentralized systems can unlock new economic opportunities and sort of like empowerment opportunities. So that's the kind of, I'm going to lean on each of you with those topics. And to kick it off, because we've got a lot of people who maybe know more about data and AI than they do about DAOs, I'm going to turn it over to each of these fine gentlemen and ask them. DAOs kind of exist as this continuum from clubs with tokens all the way to like fully on-chain governance structures with like minimal human input, maybe even more often in the future. So with that in mind, what's your working definition of what a DAO is? And I'm going to turn it to you, Greg, to start with.
Thanks for having me. FWB we're entering into our fifth year. We started in September 2020. Trevor McFedries, who's the founder, he also created Little Michaela, sent out a tweet and was like, hacked together an ERC-20 and was like, who wants to join a social club with capital? And that's kind of where we started, right? It was really a lot of people who came from really creative cultural backgrounds, really curious about how technology can improve and enhance their creative practices or their creative endeavors. And so what bound us together was a love for culture and then this token, right? And this concept that like we all collectively owned the scene. I don't know how much people in here know about music scenes or art scenes, but generally the people who profited off of it or got famous off of it were not necessarily the people who started it. And so this kind of solved one of those things, like, all right, who was actually there? And you can see on chain who got the first tokens. So for me, the DAO has really just been about this like creative cultural organization. Now over time we've evolved, right? We were just a group chat with a bank account, a squad with a bank account, and then we took VC money in. Then we formalized. I'm actually part of like an entity that is owned by the DAO in the C-suite role. One of our members came up with like the UNA laws, if anyone's familiar with that, and now DUNA. And so we really evolved with the time throughout the definition of DAO. And now we're this collective of 5,500 international members that we do governance. There's a core team that runs it. We do an annual festival. We do member-led events. We actually just kicked off a huge partnership with World yesterday about a new type of hackathon. So I think for me, DAO is, and that idea came from a member. So for me, I guess with that little bit of framing is, DAO is this interesting organizational structure and more of a philosophy and a mindset for us of this kind of everyone is an owner. Anyone can get in touch with the leader of it. I actually started as a member and I'm now running it. I'm not one of the original co-founders or one of the co-creators. And so I think for us, it's a pretty dynamic structure where like anyone has a voice and can kind of shift and shape the direction if they like want to put forth the effort and the idea is good enough. And it's an interesting type of governance where it's like almost every day is a shareholder meeting, but everyone's an owner as well. And so being able to, evolve and adapt to that type of organization is kind of like what I think a DAO is, at least in January 2025. And if you ask me in a year or 2 years ago, it would have been probably a very different answer.
Nice. Yeah, that's, perfect framing. Actually, the context is super valuable in order to understand where you're at now and, where it's headed. And, like some of those things you're talking about are like very reminiscent of like meritocracy sort of organization, right? Like if you want to contribute positively to this thing, you can actually work your way up to CEO because, you're positively contributing to the goals of this, organization. That's lovely. I like it. So we go with Connor. If you, with that context in mind, and you can repeat, what Greg says because these definitions are overlapping. But yeah, go for it. What's the sort of like, or your definition of DAO? And wait, before you do that, there is a difference between like, I want to hear about your working like on the ground definition versus like what a DAO could be, because we hear so much about that, from early talks from Vitalik to, like what DAOs could be. But what I'm particularly interested from you folks is like what they actually are.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that like we can pretty easily reach an intuition for why they should exist. These types of organizations should exist with sort of just two observations. The first is that we live in a world that's guided by capital. So people generally need to be paid as permission to go and do something. And they're not going to do it unless, it's the kind of thing that they can do while being able to still feed their family. And so capital is the way in which we guide the world and then also like invest in different projects and opportunities. And that when we deploy money together, we can get a lot more done than if we just do it by ourselves. So if the four of us that are on this call are decided that we wanted to collaborate on deploying capital towards some project, then probably both through our network, but also just through the fact that we've like centralized all of this funding in one place, we could get a lot more done. And so I think that what we're asking, kind of like what a DAO invites us to ask is the question of how should we decide how to deploy that capital? Like what rules of agreements should we follow in the deployment of the capital? And normally, you know, in the you know, collectives of people who are deploying their money and energy have existed forever. It's like the oldest thing in the world. But what's new is that now you can sort of submit these rules in an immutable way. They cannot be changed, and then people can opt into living according to those rules. And also, by the way, we can test whether or not those rules work, because it's not always the case that any given governance system is very good. And so what might be exciting for people who are interested in the problem of governance, or the problem of like the meta crisis or the poly crisis, you know, these like threats that we face collectively, is that DAOs also represent kind of the first opportunity for new forms of governance to come into existence and then to be tested. And so this is a forum for testing new kinds of governance in a really challenging environment, an environment that has lots of money in it. So I think that's what a DAO is for me, and why it's exciting and worth paying attention to.
Nice, love it. I mean, you could argue us, literally the four of us coming together to have this conversation and deciding to do that and taking time out of our day is exactly us coming together and deploying capital and getting more than the sum of its parts out of that interaction, because we're all going to learn a bunch. We're all going to share it with a bunch of other community members. So like a micro.
I'm a little fond of drawing the line distinctly that if all of us had like pooled our actual capital, or like had shared upside in a token, that's what would really do it. But maybe we can do that right now. Maybe we can go launch a little pumped up fund token for reimagining collaboration with DAOs.
We totally should have set that up ahead of time. I think it would have pumped for a little while and then probably dropped to zero after we were done. But yeah, it's crazy times we live in. Awesome. Thank you very much. I like the sort of like actual raw working definition. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of folks. And then I could dive in there more, but I'm going to give Ryan a chance to give his working definition, and then we'll kind of move from there. So, Ryan,
yeah,
what do we got?
Yeah, I really like the definitions that Greg and Connor shared. By the way, I'm a member of FWB. I attended Fest, and then I was sharing before that I hosted an event in Miami for FWB community members, and I had no idea who'd show up, and then a bunch of people showed up to a Cuban cafe in La Habana. So it's very cool. Recommend checking out and going to Fest. The way I think about DAOs is thinking about like what isn't a DAO, and then I get to my definition, and then I can maybe the next questions I'll talk about what we're building at DLP Labs and how this all connects to reclaiming data. So I used to work at Facebook, and content moderation at Facebook, what content gets taken off the platform versus what stays on the platform, is not voted on by the Facebook users. That's not a DAO. Here's another thing at Facebook that's not part of a DAO. How much money of the advertising revenue goes to creators on Instagram, or you could apply that same, not to pick on Facebook, let's do the same thing with TikTok. How much money goes to creators on TikTok is not governed by a DAO. Here's another example of what's not a DAO. Like if you were an early driver, a driver on Uber or Lyft, you don't have equity in those businesses. So those are not DAOs. So the jobs to be done, and then I'll get more into like the blockchain part of it. In an ideal world, it would be like you could vote on the like we use like, you know, technology, these web apps and services all day long. Like it would be cool if we would have the ability to like vote or influence the way they evolve, especially like the economics of them. But maybe it could be other things too. So that would be like literally within the world of the DAO. And I agree with what Connor was saying about, you know, there has to be some sort of like capital formation. So I think from the perspective of blockchain, it's like, okay, your ownership of some sort of token gives you governance over a shared wallet to deploy capital. So I think that, and then, you know, you can abstract that out for various use cases. And I would just, you know, broaden the definition of capital to include like, yes, it could be like, you know, you purchase, you know, tokens on Base or Solana, or you launch some sort of new like FWB token or et cetera. And then you can vote on things within the context of governance of how to deploy that capital or how to run an organization. But it could also be like, because our data is purchased and sold, You could be deploying data as capital as a form of liquidity to be able to vote or have governance or to be able to earn economics and how things work. And so that'll probably come up in future conversations or future questions. But yeah, I would say it's like a shared wallet that you control, but like the idea is that you can have governance over some sort of organization, governance over a protocol. So you have some economics and influence over that, and the ability to like access people who have power within the context of that organization.
Perfect. Nice. One of the themes I'm kind of seeing that's come up a little bit in all three responses is, a feature of a DAO is often that like these rules or sort of like ideals of the DAO are encoded immutably, as Connor put it, but that they're governing a dynamic system, right? So you have these like immutable rules over like mutable, state, if you want to take a nerdy stance on it, which means that like everybody, it's very visible up front, like what you're getting into and what you can get out of it. And those rules are up front so that you can participate openly and freely, knowing that you get what you put out or put in and put out. So that's sort of like immutable rules for immutable ecosystem is kind of a neat concept. I have a quick question actually about the sort of deployment of capital, just to get sort of like nitty gritty on that. And if any one of you feel free to jump in. Is the idea of like joint deployment of capital, is that a proxy for something else, or is that a fundamental piece of the DAO puzzle? Like, is it a proxy for like stake or reputation, or is that deployment of capital an actual important function of a DAO because it is an organization in the sense that we think about other organizations?
I think deployment of capital for the sake of deployment of capital, it doesn't work on its own. There has to be a reason for it and ultimately benefit the DAO. So Ryan, I've always felt that like FWB members need like a hand signal. If we end up showing up on a call and we don't know who the other one is, just to know
should do that.
Like one of these.
Yeah.
But like Ryan participated in a program what we call event keys. So we just finished our first version of it. Every year we take a portion of our treasury and we allocate it to this thing called event keys, where members can apply to run member-led events. My start at FWB, when I went from member, my first role was building the cities program with an incredible group of other DAO members. And we were just in New York and Los Angeles and London. We have members all over the world, and the members were, like we want to throw events. So we came up with this decentralized program. We have an application process, a reporting process. It's pretty stringent. There's pretty strong consequences. Like if you abuse the funds and you don't report it, you get kicked out of the DAO. So we just kind of had this barrier to entry. But after that, it was kind of like, whatever you want to do with that money within the parameters. And it was really clear. We had like 500 for a light key and 3,000 for long key for an event key. And the idea was like, let's get our footprint bigger. Let's allow members who are super proud of it. And it's been great for members and also for driving attendance. And, since the implementation of it a few years ago, we've done 240 global events in 40 cities, countries, all member-led, 100% reporting. And they've all been like A+ events. They're incredible. And it's not just the deployment of capital, but it's deployment of capital for the benefit of the DAO. And so I think Nouns is really great as well, right? I think if you look at their model, I think they nailed the financials really well, right place, right time with, purchasing those kind of NFTs. But when they deploy their capital, it's like, how does it benefit the Nouns brand? And I think that's really good. So for us, when we deploy capital to our members, it's like good for them, good for the DAO, right? And that it has to really check probably good for the DAO more than good for them in that order.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. That makes sense, right? Deployment of capital for the sake of that is never enough, and the DAOs provide a framework within which to actually point that capital at doing something. Okay. Cool. Anyone want to add to that, or are you ready for my next one?
Maybe one additional thing to add is not only is it about deploying capital, but it's about creating shared upside for the people that are deploying it, right? So that you're in the same so that you're in the you're in that ship together. And then this is like this experience of making these shared bets and like kind of trying to collectively grow a brand is really core to the fact that like to the flywheel that lets this continue to build, because then more people come along and they buy more of the FWB token, and then they get more upside, and then they get to also spread it some more. And so I think yeah, it is about capital deployment, but it what's cool about it is that you're of course localizing upsides to people who are participating in spreading it to the world, which is super rare, right? It's not very common that when you join a club, as the club is spread to more people, that also is good for you. Oftentimes clubs have a tendency to become very closed, right? Because what makes it a valuable club is that it's hard to get into. And what's cool about something like Friends with Benefits is that the club becomes more valuable for me as a participant as it becomes more open, as more people get excited about it. That's a cool property.
Nice. All right. So I have a couple more questions, but I do still want to get a little bit of into like why DAO as a last closing point before we kind of move on. And one question I have for each of you is like, evidently you've all either are interested in designing sort of like these organizations or being members. And so the question I would ask you is like, when did you first engage or otherwise experience a DAO as your working definition, like maybe applies? And like, what was the sort of like, oh shit, this is actually like a real thing kind of moment that compelled you to actually like keep participating, right? In Web3, a lot of times it's like, oh, this is a cool idea, but it's not sticky enough to like garner a continual participation. But like, I'm looking at 3 people who, that didn't happen. So what is it? What was that oh shit moment? What this is actually something important. We'll start with Ryan. You haven't gone first yet. Put you on the spot.
I'll give you participate in a handful of DAOs, and I usually think about it in the context of like, we've given some definitions like what I'm trying to achieve. Like I'll go outside of the FWB example. Like when I at Polygon, from a technology perspective, like the Polygon improvement proposals, if there's an update to the protocol, an update to the technology, there's usually a conversation with like what's called the community, which is like a group of stakeholders who are either holders of the full token or developers building on top of that ecosystem. So any change to technology is going to go through governance. So it's like really significant, the outcomes of that governance and decision-making process. And there were a lot of stakeholders who'd be impacted. So that's kind of where I saw it was important. In my context specifically, just give a little context like what we're doing. So we're helping, if you have a car, your car collects a lot of valuable data, and there are a lot of companies who want to pay for access to this data. So we're working with a deep pin called Demo. So what you can do is basically like stream your car's data to developers. You can charge for access, and you can make like passive income from your data. So we're coordinating using tokens to coordinate a big data set and then license that on behalf of the community. And we built that on the top of a blockchain called Vana, and that's how we got in touch. I'm like part of like this Vana DAO organization, and I wanted to influence the development of the Vana protocol, specifically relating to staking rewards. I know this is like in the weeds, but there was something I wanted to influence as it relates to their technology. So I submitted a Vana request for comment, like influenced by the ERCs, Ethereum request for comment to like update the protocol, and now that's been like considered by the founder, by engineering teams to be implemented. So like from my perspective, like it's very like, I know sometimes we can get like philosophical, but I think about it like from a very practical perspective. It's like capital formation to have like upside, like working together as a team on the internet, like the ability to influence a piece of technology, like that's going to help update it so it like works better for everybody. Like these, to me, these are like very practical things. And the ability to have like access to actually make a change with like tech you're using as a stakeholder, not just a customer, I think is like really cool. So that's just like my kind of journey. I don't know if that's like philosophical, but I find it like a very practical way to like create influence and get things done and like work together on the internet.
Whew, I love that. That's like a perfect storm of like a series of events through the DAO timeline to like oh, actually, I've submitted something now and it's being considered for implementation. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to pass it to Greg. And then Ryan, I'm going to come back to you because I want to follow up a little bit on what you guys are doing.
By the way, Ryan, very cool. Demo is great. And also very interested in, the thing about Web3 some years ago, they're like, you can sell, like you own your data and you can sell it. And you're like, how am I as an individual going to sell my data? So very cool to see you doing that. For me, I think, Carson, you said it, it's about meritocracy. I really think that, especially when we were all at home and no one could go out and be charming and kind of schmooze their way into position. I really felt that DAOs were about who contributed. A lot of people just kind of rolled their sleeves up and got their hands dirty. I mean, that's how I got here. And I think what's interesting for FWB that the people running it are not any of the people who started it. And to have a whole new team running a DAO and us continuing to be able to ship work and do this annual festival and member-led projects and the thing that we announced yesterday with World. I think it's a really interesting thing about like who's willing to be able to kind of step up and do it, and then having a structure for people to be open and come to do it. And you can be put in a position and then absolutely not do the work. And I think it's so open source that you can get removed, and you can't hide anywhere within a DAO. Everyone sees it. So I think that to me, time and time again, is the way in which I've seen it. And there's so many stories in the space of people who kind of like what Ryan said, like joined a Discord or joined a DAO and was just a member and maybe started contributing or writing papers or hosting events. And then as soon as a position opened, boom, they were up level. So I think that's probably a more common story than is maybe recognized or told about where people get into positions here and how they're able to kind of find a place that feels like home and then be able to kind of move their way up. And that's personally what I love about the structure and what I've seen at other places, and then heard story time and time again about what makes this so different for people who can get rewarded for the work that they do.
I mean, it's the promise of like joining an org with with a vision, and you work hard and you contribute to that vision and you're supposed to move up. And it doesn't always work out that way in reality, but maybe these new structures are making that a little bit more realistic. That's really nice sentiment, I think. Connor, what about when did you get? What was your aha moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, it came from before I learned about the term DAO. Maybe before DAO was even a term. There was this sense in which the problem of governance was like this really thorny problem, and that there was this new there's this way that we could make money out of thin air, and it seemed like money was core to the problem of governance, right? It seemed like you would look at politicians being corrupt or greedy, and you'd look at bribes that were passing hands, and you're like, okay, like money seems to be at the heart of this problem. And now we have the ability, now we have this newfound control over money. What does that open up in terms of how we can build new organizations, institutions, or governments? And so I think that was when like my thinking on the subject began. I have a little bit of a gripe even with the term DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, because I think in a lot of cases, they needn't even be organizations, right? They can just be an institution, which is, I think, a little bit more open. Somebody doesn't need to like be someone who works there. They can be someone who like is just associated with it in some way, or benefits from it in some way, and has some voice in how it in the path that it takes. And so I'm been a long time fan of this direction of experimentation, and I'm really hopeful about what the world looks like when like the versions of DAOs that are really promising, when those have kind of like made it out of this next cycle of course there's an expansion and a contraction cycle, and when the ones that emerge will be really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think I love that across the board in Web3. There's this like theme of experimentation. you know, DeFi is an example of like, let's just experiment with like all these different financial primitives to see, you know, where we can take this and what we can do. DAOs are obviously a great example of like rapid experimentation with governance. And you just can't really do that. Like, this is a really good example of like something that couldn't exist until the concept of a DAO was invented, and the infrastructure in place to do that, you know, came to bear on the problem. Like,
Yeah.
now we can experiment with actual governance structures rapidly, and we can try things out and go like, whoa, that didn't work. But that's okay, because you know, this particular organization has come together to try and solve a particular problem, and we'll move to like a different org structure. And so on that front, this is
to kind of like to reiterate also what Greg said is, I'm really hopeful that there's the possibility of a world that's less about politics and more about taking bets. I think that a lot of what we see inside of orgs, inside of dysfunctional orgs, is people trying to avoid responsibility, and that, you know, it's actually the talented kind of like VP that never quite actually takes responsibility for a choice, because then if it doesn't go well, it doesn't land on them. And so I'm quite excited about like how fast would we move if we were all inside of organizations where each of us was participating in a bet.
Actually, yeah. So on that front, I have a question for you, maybe, Greg, which is, you know, in that vein, where we are experimenting in sort of like quote unquote real time with governance structures. How does FWB approach like you know, evaluating an approach and then like deciding whether that works or not, and making sort of like you know, purposeful changes to that governance structure?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things that we have done extraordinarily well. We have a really great governance structure that was put into place by two members, Emo and Brian, a while ago, where we had this core team, but obviously like we wanted it to be member run. So we have a whole system, and I don't know off the top of my head, but like every major decision that has happened for FWB, our quarterly budgets, you know, I'm essentially on a 90-day leash from the community, and I have to get my my salary and the core team salary approved every 90 days. Fest, we're migrating our token to Base. That was a big vote, and so the process is we have a standard form. You write it, you fill it out. Any member can make a proposal, and we have to entertain it as long as they follow the form. It's not just like, you know, you can put a few words up there. And then we open it up for debate. And sometimes debate can be 5 days, and then we put it up for vote on Snapshot, or sometimes things have stretched on for 2-3 months, depending on if it's like a really meaty topic. And it's really incredible because people are like, God, how do you run an organization like that? Like, how do you get anything done? Well, there is a timeline. We do put things up for vote, but here's what I saw was different. We, you know, a top-down hierarchy can make decisions and they have no idea if they're popular or not, right? But they can do that. And if they're popular, no one says anything. But all of us have seen when some organization made an unpopular change and they have to do so much work. They can't back down, right? Because there's a lot of pride and ego and all that stuff. But then they have to really like force this thing through, and people feel that like they're not being listened to or not heard. So we take all of that bullshit and move it to the proposal process. So we'll debate stuff for weeks and months on end on it, but like and we have to adapt the proposal, right? You know, we go in, we change it, we get it to that. And we, you know, usually then gets down to like a handful of people who are kind of hammering out the final details. But we have a 99% passage rate. There's 2 proposals that have ever been no. And that's not because it's just people are sycophants. It's because we do all the hard work of discussion and community building and discourse ahead of time, that when it passes, it's then the mandate to the core team just to go execute it. And it's been incredible. I mean, it's really like that I think almost anything out of DAOs, beside the meritocracy and the squad with a bank account, that to me really opened my eyes that like building in public it's not for the faint of heart, but if you have a courage and conviction about your idea and you're willing to have your mind changed and be open to know that everything in life changes, every big idea changes. No CEO puts an idea out there and then it's the same at at the end. If you're willing to do that and also take the risk that it might be voted down, no, it totally changes the power dynamic and gets more people involved in practice stakeholdership. So I'm really, really proud of what we've built as a community in governance. I really think it's that, and if anyone out there wants to talk about it, either with me or the team members that built it, it's something that we spent a lot of time on, and we're super proud of.
There's a way better answer than I was even hoping for. So that's fantastic. Is there like a white paper, or like, is this more of a like conversation if folks are interested in hearing more?
You know, to be honest, and this is me just putting out in the universe, we have always wanted to write a white paper about governance, but we wanted to do a much more academic approach for it and pay someone to do it. So if anyone out there has know of any grants around DAO governance or Web3 governance, greg@fwb.help. Once again, it's greg@fwb.help. Hit me up. We'd love to kind of do this and co-publish something together.
Very cool. Yeah. I mean, hey, that would be a great way for someone to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the outside too, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I don't know if we want to keep on this line of chat.
Honestly, it might be really interesting, Greg, if you could just give kind of a high level of what it's like more or less, how do you reach 99% passage rate of these proposals?
I mean, it's in the process. I mean, the two proposals that didn't pass, I was involved with both of them. On the other side of it, one was something that was very unpopular that just didn't pass. And one was we actually realized that we actually needed to restart the whole process all over. Like we were in the middle of something, we realized that it wasn't working. So we actually everyone revoted, turned it no, and that gave us, it's very interesting. We all really believe in it. Like we really strongly adhere to this. It's also in our bylaws, and that there's actually actual legal ramifications for us following it. I mean, I've done it. I've definitely I can tell you the token migration one was actually probably the biggest thing. So we launched in 2020. The only thing that was available was an ERC20. And so that's what we started. Having a token on mainnet, I think probably everyone knows the pitfalls of that, specifically around gas fees. And clearly with the rise of L2s and the rise of meme coins has been, you kind of just see we don't have that momentum. So one of the things that we've been working on is moving this token over to Base. And it's complex. There's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of things you can't do. There's a lot of things that members wanted. Some of them were great. Some of them, we were not legal in certain ways. And so it was a really, really long debate. We had members that would come in and open up ideas and we actually didn't know the answer to. So we went to different counsel and paid lawyer fees and really chased down all the things that we were like, actually, that sounds great. Let's just check. So it was a really long debate. It was a really open debate. And some people, it's their bag, right? So there's no guarantee about any of this stuff. And so we tried to build a system where, to the best of our ability, that we could transfer this and that the amount of money that you had in your wallet was congruent to what you would have when you transferred it. And I spent a lot of time talking to people. And there's a few other people who also spent a lot of time talking to people. And I think it took about 3 to 4 months to get to a place where and putting it to vote is a bit of a gut instinct in that way, where you're you don't want to put it to vote to silence a voice, but you also want to make sure that the people who are the lurkers can come off the side bench. And we got to a point, and even the people that were probably some of the biggest proponents, they voted yes, right? So it's really holding ourselves to a really high standard and not just moving it to vote, but really feeling that, okay, we've heard everyone, we've chased everything down, we've heard everything. It's either been, okay, that's a better idea, and we're going to change it, or it's a no with a really good explanation of we're going to change it. And so there's 100 points. We don't just 99, we don't have 98, we just 100 points. And we do that due diligence on our side, and then that's when we get up to vote. And that's, everyone feels, a lot of these things is about people feeling heard and that their input matters, whether or not it's the outcome that they get based on regulation or thing. But it's really making sure that our members, we make the promise of this is a flatter hierarchy structure and we're willing to listen to you. So that's how we get to that 99% rate. It's a fair amount of work, but I also think it's a lot of work if you don't do this on the other side as well.
So, and I mean, presumably you have like kind of a philosophy in place where you get to some point in the discussion, and like the right move is to sort of like to disagree and commit to some, you know, some outcome, because that's what's going to move the DAO forward, right? Like if you really didn't want it on base, but actually everybody, you know, we've done this discussion and it seems like a good move, let's go for it. I guess you have to cultivate a philosophy of that too.
Yeah, I don't let any conversations happen in private DMs. I like if people want to have a conversation with me about it, we can publicly do it. I'll get on the phone with you if you want to chat about it, but then I'll recap it in there. It's like, I think that kind of backroom, kind of in the shadows, is where things end up getting murky. And it's like some people kind of just don't want to have those they don't want their own self-interest to be in the sunlight, and I'm not willing to cover for any of that. The most important thing is the DAO and the health of the DAO and the future of the DAO. That's kind of like that's the guiding light. And so if you want to be selfish or self-centered or things like that, which we've seen in the past, once you bring it into light, the other DAO members will pretty much be like, yo, come on. And so that's how you get to it. And I'm not saying that's all the time, but you know, it's a wide spectrum. We have a lot of people, but most people are coming from a very good place. They just have, you know, and what's great about DAOs, they just different opinions on things, and they're curious, and you know, we're on the cutting edge, so they don't know if we can do these things, if it's is it illegal or is it innovative, right? Where does it fall into that? And we're able to kind of like really chase that down because we've got great legal support and other great minds helping us, you know, succeed.
Awesome. Okay, well, I want to give a little bit of, we've talked about FWB quite a bit. I mean, it's a great example because it's been around for a while and is obviously successful. I want to give Ryan a chance to talk a little bit about his project. So, you know, maybe I'm just going to throw you how do actually individuals kind of take their personal data and assets, or personal data, and turn them into assets in the framework? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And, and like how is the DAO involved in that process?
Okay, sure. So I'll get really practical. So you go to a site called demo.org if you have a car. Like let's say someone has a Tesla. And then you sign up, and then because Tesla has a bunch of APIs, you can actually like log in and you can connect your Tesla's data, or you could buy a hardware device and connect it to really many different types of cars. And what you're then doing is like you're streaming your car's data. Like, how do you utilize the energy grid? If it's a Tesla, it could be like everything from like when your lease is up, like your battery health, driving, like the cameras that it's using to take pictures on the road. There's like a tremendous amount of data that's being captured by your vehicle. And so Demo gives your car a digital ID, and then it allows you to stream that data to developers, to companies who can pay for access. What Demo doesn't do is Demo does not make that connection between the end customers, like the companies that want to pay for the access, and all the users who now like have this, you know, who have their card and the ability to stream data. They do issue the Demo token. So our solution that we've done is built on top of Demo, and we get people, if you're a driver just like myself and you have a car and you want to be able to earn more from your data, your valuable data, what you can do is log in and share your vehicle permissions. And then companies like energy companies will pay you. You can charge them access to that data. So there's a company that I just spoke to today, and they said, hey, we want to see the impact of like how temperature is impacting like battery health, because we have this like EV network, and we'll pay a subscription for all the cars that you have in the Demo network to like do this. And I'm like, awesome. So let me, you know, get the Demo community involved, and people can log in and opt in to charge for their data and make extra money. And the idea is if you could get like 10 different customers to subscribe to your data for you, you can make an extra $150. If you got 100, you can make an extra $1,500. And this is part of a larger thing that's happening. So that's the basic idea. It's like we are producing tons of valuable data, and in an age of AI, that these LLMs are being trained on our data, you're able to commercialize that on your own behalf, and it's really powerful when we can do that together.
Right.
I got into this interesting world because you may have known that Reddit sold $300 million of Reddit data to train Google Bard and to train OpenAI like GPT, because the conversations are super valuable for training those LLMs. And obviously, as a Reddit user, I didn't get paid for my data, nor did anybody. So Vana, the blockchain, launched a data DAO, where you could basically do a data request and export your Reddit data because of GDPR, basically, and CCPA, the data regulatory environment in Europe and the United States. All the data, basically all the companies that collect data have to allow you to export it and bring it to a third-party controller, so you can do a data request from Instagram, Reddit, LinkedIn, etc. And then we pulled our data together and got tokens, and that was a really cool experiment. And in theory, like you could train AI models on that, but I think with a really powerful data set is like from an API, which means like live data, which means like a feed, as opposed to just like a snapshot. So that's what we're trying to do with this demo data set, is like help people get paid. Now, from a governance perspective, we're not at the point that FWB is at in terms of like the full DAO, because we're getting this off the ground. Like I'm working with demo community members about like how this works, making sure like being really transparent about the permissions, being really transparent about the pricing. Over time, I would love to be able to have like to progressively decentralize, so that like there's more input about the go-to-market. There's more input about like how the protocol is going to operate as we like abstract some of the things that we're doing manually into like smart contracts. And especially like, and if we do launch a token over time, like being able to reward folks like with the token, have people have input around that. So we're on a path of like progressive decentralization on that front. But I think we definitely have the ethos of like everybody owns their data, it's an asset, and you should be generating revenue from it. And over time, I'd like to have the governance of the mechanism get closer to what FWB is doing. But first, we want to get it off the ground. So that's kind of where we're at. And I'll leave on this note. The reason I'm doing that is with the Reddit data DAO, because it wasn't like there wasn't a person running point on it. Like it was hard to really get it going on in terms of the generating revenue. But there are a lot of people contributing, and there's a lot of power to that. So I think there's this like balance of making sure there's like a core team who are on the hook for certain things, but also like giving governance out to the community. And maybe even to a certain extent with FWB, like Greg, if I understand correctly, you're part of a company that's owned by FWB, and like I don't do as much work as you do for FWB, but like I can participate in governance proposals. There is this like model of like core team and like different ways that you can participate to make sure you get stuff done. So that's what we're up to. And just some of my reactions.
I mean, it's like, it's based on the premise that like data is a lot more valuable when you pool it and sell it as a sort of data product. And we've seen in the past, it's pretty hard to sell individual data like as an individual data point, because very few, data consumers care about you in particular. But, your example of like, trying to understand patterns in, battery and heat usage and things like that. Like you can only get that when you combine a bunch of user data together into a data set that actually like answers specific questions. So, I mean,
that's the whole deep in category. Like that's all these like decentralized physical infrastructure, whether it's like Havelo, Helium, all this stuff. Now they might not they're doing different stuff as it relates to DAOs and decentralized governance, but the idea is like the token is a coordination is coordinating all these people together to share data, and then they're ideally, they're supposed to be commercializing that. So that seems to be what's like emerging here, which is interesting. Yeah.
And so the data DAOs are, in this sense, are acting as a sort of like reseller of that data, right? It's a collective bargaining with data consumers and actually like doing the sales. Is that part of it?
Yeah, that's part of it for sure. I think, I'll give you like, I'm not so in the weeds on like a Hive mapper, and like, so I hope that I'm not speaking out of turn, but like a different one you could look at is like, okay, so you download this app on your phone, you're providing mapping data, you're getting token incentives as a result of that, and then they're commercializing that mapping data on your behalf, which could drive value accrual to the token. So like you have an economic incentive, and then like it would make sense over time that like that token would give you governance of like how things works, and you could potentially like if you're promoting high macro and driving user, maybe that could be like a full-time role that emerges for you, and you have like, you're influencing like a foundation as opposed to just, so it's like different. I would put it in contrast to like Google Maps, where you use Google Maps, you have no upside in the economics of it. You're not like influencing like the product roadmap and stuff like that. So it seems to me like that's the direction a lot of these beacons are going, with different levels of decentral, like the emphasis on decentralization and like giving governance to the community is, I think, varies. I think like what stays the same is there's an economic incentive for all the participants. The governance, I think, is like not everybody's doing giving everybody the governance. And that's just what my observation.
Nice. Okay. All right. I want to give a little chance to chat with Connor about public goods funding. This is something that I'm actually pretty interested in, like on a personal level. And I don't know, I mean, no problem if you weren't, but last week I was chatting with Juan Benet from Protocol Labs, who also has a pretty strong personal interest in public goods funding. And something that came up is like, there's a lot of new sort of like approaches to how you can create sustainable public goods funding models, but it's actually it's really hard because people don't want to pay for things that they can like kind of use for free. So like I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of like how are we innovating on public goods funding, and where does a sort of like DAO memberships and DAOs play a key role in that work?
Yeah, this is great. I love Juan Bennett's work, and I'm really excited about, there's about 5-ish mechanisms that have emerged in the last couple of years for public goods funding that are genuinely novel mechanisms that probably wouldn't have existed if not for the cryptoverse, predominantly because there's something special that happens when people feel as though they have freedom to think however they want, and then because they have this confidence that they'll be able to later deploy whatever it is that they come up with onto a network somewhere. And so, some of them that are definitely worth pointing out is quadratic funding. If you've ever heard of quadratic funding, it is a way to for basically a donor who cares about an ecosystem, like for example, if it was the Friends with Benefits ecosystem or a data DAO ecosystem, to take a bunch of capital and then to kind of say to their community, hey, if you donate to a cause that you care about, then this is how much we'll match it. And when more people donate to a cause, there's more matching funds that are provided to it. And it turns out that it has these really beautiful mathematical properties, which are the things that I care about, that ensure that it kind of like optimally funds various different goods. Another one that's worth talking about are hypercerts. And hypercerts are essentially a way to create an NFT that is associated with a certain amount of impact. And there are others that are out there. I think Vitalik has a post where he says he believes that maximum there could be about 11 public goods funding mechanisms total. And right now we have about 5. He thinks that somewhere around 11. I might be getting these exact numbers wrong. I just heard this the other day, but we have about 5 today, and there's about 11 that we could expect to have when we're at full maturity. The mechanism that I'm really excited about and that I've been researching for the last year is called index wallets. Actually, Juan prefers to call it vector money, which is also a pretty cool name for it.
Pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah, and really, index wallets are super simple to describe. They're just a payment method where instead of spending with one currency, you spend with all of the currencies that are in your wallet at any given time. So if you were to go to a grocery store and you're buying your strawberries, if you have 5% ETH and 20% FWB in your wallet, then when you make the payment, the money that is transferred is 5% ETH and 20% FWB. That's it. And the key idea is that whenever you make this transfer, you're always, when that money is transferred, the person who receives it also has to spend it in that same way, where it's all bundled together like this. They can't break it apart and just spend with, just the Ethereum or just the FWB or just the USDC. And you might say, okay, why would you ever want this? Seems like it adds a constraint. I'll remind you that you are a big walking constraint. Like most of what's interesting about you is what the chemicals that make you up are not doing. Because if they were having every possible interaction, you would just be a bubbling puddle on the floor. So it's actually very important to add constraints, and sometimes cool emergent properties come for them, including humans and cultures and societies. In this particular case, what comes from this constraint is that you can show that if you had a public good that somebody had created, let's say somebody went and created a park, it would be possible for someone to donate to that park and in return get a impact certificate, kind of a receipt of donation that goes into their wallet. And now when they go and they buy from a local store, you know, they buy the strawberries from a store. If there's two stores and one of them doesn't value those tokens that are associated with the park, it'll actually feel more expensive for me as a consumer to buy from that person whose values misaligned. Meanwhile, if I go to the store that's values aligned with me, who also cares about that park, it'll feel cheaper for me to buy from them. And so by a community adopting this new form of payment method that, by the way, can only be built on top of crypto rails, they're able to fund local public goods. And in fact, the public good that they're funding could be their DAO token, right, that they also include in their wallet. And so this is a really exciting possibility, this new kind of payment mechanism. We're coming to the end of our research on it. We have done, we've looked at it both game theoretically from a mechanism perspective, like looked at the math. We've run simulations on it. So like have an imagined economy and all these people are just following their best interest. What happens? We've also created a game. So if you want, I can, maybe we can share in the show notes or something, a board game that we've created where you can actually like live inside of a little index wallets economy and buy things and set your prices, right, for the various goods that you sell. So this is the mechanism of index wallets, and I'm hopeful that it can be one of the 11 public goods funding mechanisms, right, that Vitalik is so excited about as we look to upgrade our global economic system so that it's capable of incorporating the collective outcome into private outcomes.
Oh, that's very interesting. I mean, you can think immediately like all sorts of like real world corollaries to that type of mechanism pop into my head, right? I mean, like GPL software licensing is a similar sort of like thing where you produce a good and it's software and you have this like constraint, which is like you're happy, you can use this however you want as long as you use it in this kind of way, which is pretty powerful. Our team's, my like philosophy on our team is that constraints breed creativity, and I think that's pretty good.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So if people want to check that out, the best place to go is invalidate.indexwallets.org. Don't go to .com. You'll go to some weird Chinese website. Invalidate.indexwallets.com.
Type that in correctly.
Invalidate is for the fact that we spent the first year of this trying to show that this idea doesn't work. And so we actually got funding from Blue Yard, which is this really cool VC, if you get the opportunity to check them out, to go and explore this. And then we spent all the money trying to find out that we were wrong, right? This thing can't possibly work. You can't have this simple rule that then allows you to fund public goods. And so that's where you can see the documentation of our progress trying to invalidate it.
Nice. That's proper science. Like, you'd love to see it. This one simple rule that fixes funding for public goods is the tweet thread. All right. Well, that's awesome, everybody. Thank you very much. We're at the hour. I think it went reasonably well. I got what I wanted out of it. Hopefully you got what got something useful out of it as well. Hopefully our listeners got something useful out of it in the meantime as well. If there's any final thoughts that anyone wants to throw out there into the universe, we can do that. Otherwise, for listeners, we will have a few links that came up during the conversation that we can share. And hopefully we'll catch you on the next time.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Bye.